Thank you so much for listening and joining in on the Small Group Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. We would love for you also to send our podcast to a friend. Our goal is to grow and learn as individuals, also to be a help and encouragement to others in journeys of faith and in matters of faith as we talk with one another and learn from you. So please let us know how we can serve better. And again, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it.
Come down to Coleman Liquidation by yourself at home, or don't. I don't care. This is Small Group Podcast. I'm Benjamin.
I'm Lacey.
And we are joined tonight by a very famous guest, at least in our house, known as Big Wayne Chappell. Welcome to the Small Group Podcast.
Good evening.
Good to have you.
Hey,
Wayne
man,
Chappell, by
I'm
the way.
glad to be here.
For all the peons out there who don't know you as well as we do.
My people.
So our daughter calls you Big Wayne. Did she just start doing that, or did we cause that? I can't even remember now.
I'm pretty sure you caused
I
it.
probably did. Big Wayne.
It's an endearing term, especially when she says it. It's cute.
Walking down the aisle one morning at church, during church, and I have her in my arms, and you're sitting right there. I'm like, who's that? Big Wayne. Big
Yeah.
Wayne.
I like our little people. I love our little people.
Everybody's little to you, Big
Sure.
Wayne. Well, Taylor Sabrina still in the mission field. We expect to have them back hopefully soon with a lot of updates and news from that. So we're excited and got some updates from Taylor this morning. They are just, I don't know what words to put to describe it, but you can tell he's living his best life right now. He's just having a blast.
Well, Taylor and Sabrina, we love you. We miss you, but we are praying for you and your team in Guatemala, and we are just so excited to hear all about it.
They're going to be energized when they get back, buddy, because that's what those mission trips do.
He already is.
Absolutely.
I mean, this morning he was just going on and on about it. And from all the photos that I've seen too, man, they put him to work.
Nice.
So he's having fun. Sabrina, she looks like she is working hard, but they're doing a lot of great stuff. And before we get going, I want to shout out to our small group across the country, now it's been across the world for a while, but popping up in Guatemala, thanks to Taylor and Sabrina's efforts down there doing some viral marketing. Panama City Beach, Florida, Panama City, there are our homes. They're really have done a lot, shown us a lot of support. Portland, Oregon, checking in and giving Ashburn, Virginia a run for its money, and Boardman, Oregon, Somerville, Alabama, Columbus, Ohio, Guatemala City, Guatemala, and Glendale, Arizona. Some of our recent listeners and members of small group. Thank you guys for joining with us again.
Jingle bells, jingle yay, jingle good for you.
See, we got a fine oiled machine here. You're witnessing.
I'm telling you, it is firing on all 7 cylinders.
So let's get things started here on a light note.
Okay, so today's icebreaker question is going to be a little bit different because we're coming up on the 4th of July and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. What is it called?
Semi-quincentennial.
Okay.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. Like try saying that.
First annual semi-quincentennial.
So I'm just kind of curious, who is your favorite U.S. president?
I know this one. Harrison Ford, Air Force One. Get off my plane. Name a president better than that. I'll wait.
An actual, for real president?
Oh, that's not a president?
So the problem is I can't remember his character name. So I just Harrison Ford
just
is
Harrison
the best
Ford.
president.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe the guy from 24, the guy that played president from 24.
Yeah.
But these are real. They're real to me.
Why is Ben's hand bleeding? Why is there a fork sticking out of it?
That's an interesting question. I've never really thought about it, and honestly, I don't know that I have a favorite president. But when I think about them, Thomas Jefferson is who comes to mind first, and then of course, George Washington, Abe Lincoln,
Teddy.
I was going to say throw some Roosevelt in there. Yeah, but
good.
Thomas Jefferson probably is, and Ben Franklin, because of all his accolades. No, boo.
Well, it was great having you on the show tonight, big one.
Yeah. Wow.
Harrison Ford. It's looking pretty good now.
No,
Benjamin Franklin wasn't a president. He was a founding father, but he wasn't a president.
so in my mind, I just see those characters.
Yeah.
So that's what I should
Yeah.
say, not necessarily
Sorry.
presidents. I'm thinking of these characters of the founding fathers. Yes.
So, yeah. But you actually stole my answer. So Thomas Jefferson is my favorite.
Really?
He was just so fascinating.
Very fascinating.
So yeah, but I've been to Monticello twice, and it's so beautiful. But how he was just like this wealth of knowledge, and he was just, I don't know, just very curious. But I also loved his relationship with John Adams, and like that rivalry, but friendship, but like frenemies kind of thing. But the fact that they both died on the same day, and it was July 4th, it's just, I love it. I could totally geek out about this all day. So I'm sorry.
Who's the first president of the United States? Little trivia question. Who is the first president of the United States?
Washington.
I'm guessing because you asked the question, Washington's probably not the first one.
No, giving your answer, I thought I might have I'm just playing. No, so have you ever noticed? Okay, so when was George Washington president? Do you remember?
I don't think.
It's like, actually, I don't even know that one. It was like 1780 something. Hang on, she's looking it up. Do you know when George Washington was president? Have you ever thought about this? So when was
Okay, 1789 to 1797.
and when was Independence Day as we know it?
1776.
Right. So you've got that gap.
Right.
So-
Do you ever think about that?
Well,
Who was-
yeah. So,
Hmm.
but you had the war, and then they had to form the Articles of Confederate, or not? Was that right?
Something like that.
And then the Constitution, and like there was a process.
There was a lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was the Articles of Confederation, that was 1781. Before that, there was Continental Congress. So there's
Right.
government before Washington. So technically, the first president, Peyton Randolph, he never gets any love. So I thought,
Poor Peyton.
poor
Yeah.
Peyton, man.
I'm just gonna.
There's always a George Washington come in and just wipe you from history.
Yeah.
John Hancock, too, was president.
His name's probably on some water tower somewhere.
Henry Middleton, these poor guys. John Jay. Anyway.
Anyways, who was your?
Just a little trivia, given the semi-quincentennial. Teddy Roosevelt's a great one. It's a strong one, but John Adams. John Adams is another one I think doesn't get a lot of attention. So there was a HBO miniseries that came out for John Adams, really good and really faithful to there was a biography. Who was that biography? Walter Isaacson or anyway, great biography, great story. And the more I get to know about John Adams, the more I feel like I get John Adams. He's very, and I don't know. This isn't me. This is how I see myself. But he is very intellectual, and he knows like what's right and what the right thing to do is. And he gets so frustrated at everybody else when it's just like, look, it's so obvious, and just his character and personality. David McCullough. Thank you. That was the author. That's a great book, by the way. He's got a lot of great lines, phrases. His writings are just really great stuff. Even on his memorial up in DC, if you ever get to read some of the stuff that they put on his memorial, is great stuff.
I love John Adams' relationship with his wife. Like how
she's another great character too, Abigail.
Like how he always like in all of their letters, he addressed her as my dearest friend.
Oh.
That's just the sweetest thing.
One of my quick favorite quotes: "Facts are stubborn things." Because you remember the shot her around the world or whatever when up in Boston, when Boston Massacre or whatever. He actually represented the British soldiers who shot the Bostonians or whatever, and was actually successful in defending them in Boston. And that was a fascinating chapter of history. Anyway, enough about John Adams. Let's get back to Peyton Randolph. I'm just kidding. Let's get into Big Wayne.
Jingle
Oh,
bell.
wrong button. I'm sorry, Big Wayne. So, Wayne, you and I have had a lot of great conversations at church, different stuff. One thing, and you and I talking about, you coming on the show, what would you want to talk about? And you brought up a topic that I feel like we've kind of talked about in roundabout ways. It's just been kind of an undercurrent of a lot of things. And I guess the best way, and you summed it up like this, the integrity of conscience, which I find very fascinating. And if you want to kind of just open up a little bit about what that is and your thoughts on integrity of conscience and what that means.
Well, we're actually making it into a movie very soon. But,
Harrison Ford,
it sounds a lot more interesting probably than what I'll be able to say about it. But, it's our conscience is certainly a driving force for how we as Christians live our lives. And it's something that I guess is becoming more and more of a focal point for me in, I guess, gaining a better understanding and a better hold on maintaining the integrity of my conscience, meaning that I listen to or abide by my conscience.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that my conscience is always right? No. But from the standpoint of my own understanding and conclusions that I've
just the term conscience, I feel like is fading in our common vernacular today. You see it in the Bible, in Scripture. It pops up in our English translations. But beyond, like, if you hear, we don't spend a whole lot of, we kind of do spend time in church in discussion, spiritual discussions about consciousness, but kind of in a roundabout way. It's kind of that thing that's not said a whole lot, that's underlying everything. But in our just everyday conversations, beyond like, let your conscience be your guide, as a 90s kid growing up, that was always a big Disney thing, let your conscience be your guide kind of. But I feel like it's something that's just like right there in front of us, but we don't really analyze it and go to it. And so, but it's a big part of Scripture, as we'll see a lot there. What's really got you, as far as where you are in your own personal walk and everything? Like, what about the integrity of consciousness? What has been like what's got you thinking on those terms?
That's a really great question. I think a lot of it boils down to, as I continue to evaluate my own growth and the challenges that I have in my own life, maintaining integrity to my conscience and not overriding that for my own selfish whatever term you want to put there after that, whether it be selfish pleasures or what have you.
Yeah.
Where I just blow right through what my conscience would otherwise have me, check up on. And, I've got friends and acquaintances that as we, share with each other, I learned that sometimes they're dealing with the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so how is it that, I as an individual strengthen that integrity to better maintain my conscience and let that be a guiding boundary for me? And how do I, as a good friend, help somebody, to strengthen their conscience and be sensitive to their conscience?
Have any questions or any topics you would like us to discuss, or just have comments about anything we discuss here at Small Group? Then please email us at goat.bear.lobster@gmail.com. You can also reach us at our website, smallgrouppodcast.wordpress.com. Find more on how to reach us in the podcast description.
Yeah, and because all that's great stuff, and I don't want to jump ahead too far. And maybe coming, as we back up just a hair, defining conscience, I think, is really where we got to start. And you got a quick, simple answer for that? Because I don't.
I wish it were that simple, right? As we've been talking about it, I think that I tend to lean into kind of a composite of an innate discernment and a learned discernment that we have. Since we are God's created creatures, I think that there is some component of an innate discernment that we have, a conscience that we might have.
Innate meaning just like a foundational, just almost like, if everything is stripped away, the absolute essence. And when you think of it in that way, it's like, is that even alterable? That innate sense. Is
Right.
it there, and it is up to us to listen to it, grow from it, or completely ignore it? But it begs the question, is that innateness, is that foundational sense of its nature, is that even alterable? I wonder. I'm sorry, I went 0 to 60 here. Well,
I don't know how to answer that. I think it's so I think I'll frame the rest of this podcast this way. I don't have all the answers.
then what are we even doing here?
We're I think we're putting information out there for others to consider for themselves, to do some study, because I think this is it's a great opportunity for us all to dig in a little deeper. What is our conscience doing for us?
Yeah. Well, and being aware that it's there and
Right.
the nature of it. Just some, I want to say medical terms, some more educated definitions of it that I found that's very fascinating, goes along with what you're saying as far as it being, that relationship with your conscience, of it being a guide, and you either discerning along with it or ignoring it. Some definitions of either the Greek term, the sunedesis, which is typically what it shows up in the text when we translate it as conscience, co-perception. Found that very interesting. Co-perception, or moral consciousness, moral and spiritual consciousness as part of being created in the divine image.
Right.
I think that's probably the best one that gets to the heart of what you're describing. Joint knowing. So it's like the conscience is almost, it's in a way, it seems like that relationship. We've spent a lot of time on this show talking about relationship with God and all of that, but that's what this is. It's that co-perception, joint knowing. It's you and that divine innate part of you that is, created in the divine image. It's you cooperating with that. all people have this God-given capacity to know right from wrong because each is a free moral agent. Innate discernment, that's one term. Self-judging consciousness. It just kind of goes back to that, that whole idea, not to go too deep here on this, but it's like, you can have those conversations, whether spiritual or non-spiritual, as far as how do we know what's right and wrong? How, what are those foundational things that we can all agree on, whether, all of us, whether we're spiritual, not spiritual, religious, not religious, whatever, we can all agree murder, I think, is a big one. Stealing is a big one. Those usually, to me, are the first two that come to mind. That seems to be a innate sense of right or wrong. That's bad and that's good. There's just always, where does that come from is always the big question. It's like, and I'm thinking in terms, if you're talking to someone who doesn't believe in God or doesn't believe in, God created, that conscience is always kind of a little window into that conversation as far as, is there a God or isn't there a God? There's always that one little kink in that argument of there not being a God, is that innate moral discernment that you're talking about.
Right. And for those people, and you're having that conversation, maybe if you're not gaining any ground on does God exist, and then ask them, then what guides you,
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll find out very soon whether there is any hidden belief there, or if they're truly just going on what makes them happy or feel good.
Is murder wrong? And if they say yes, why is it wrong? What makes you think that it's wrong?
Right.
Yeah, those are those little things that you just can't get around, that are at the foundation of so much of our own thinking. But man, that's the hardest thing, is trying to define it. And there's no real simple way to define consciousness, but we all seem to sense it.
Right. And we'll have, our consciences will vary on any given subject. You and I could have very different guides, if you will, on different aspects of our beliefs in life.
Yeah.
That many times we may be very well aligned. And I think that that's also a challenge for us as friends, as believers, to come to an understanding as how is it that we, as believers, as friends, walk this life together, and guarding our consciences and helping to strengthen those consciences.
That's really the biggest part. I mean, yes, you have the dynamic between believer, non-believer. That's important. But then also, especially when you get into believer and believer, right, and when they start to differ on something, who's right and who's wrong, that's something I guess in my mind we're probably going to build to, because I feel like that's the big part that we're going to get to in this episode. But I mean, I can't really walk around it a whole lot. One more real quick definition of conscience: internal faculty by which a person discerns moral right and wrong. Internal faculty. I think that's probably the most clinical or sterile way to boil it down. But I did want to open, so if we're going to go ahead and start throwing some scripture in Romans chapter 2. It's so hard, especially Romans, anything Paul writes, it's so hard to come in on just a verse. I'm going to give just a quick section. It's chapter 2 of Romans. I'm going to start verse 12. I know I'm still coming in the middle of it, it seems like, but he's going on about law and righteousness, really. It's
a good one.
He does a lot about law and righteousness, and, the dynamic of law and how does it fit into this new covenant. And start in verse 12, Romans 2:12. For all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. Talk about Old Testament law, Mosaical law. And all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law instinctively perform the requirements of the law, these, though not having the law, are a law to themselves. So a lot of that's for context, at least a little bit of context. Here, verse 15 is a big one. In that they show the works of the law written in their hearts, their conscience testifying, and their thoughts alternately accusing or else defending them on the day when, according to my gospel, God will judge the secrets of mankind through Christ Jesus. And I know, like I said, I'm coming in, there's so much more context there in just that chapter alone. But throughout that chapter, I like the kind of drawing the parallel to the law. The law is kind of a almost physical, tangible thing that we can look to give us insight into consciousness. He's talking about the Gentiles who didn't live under the law, but are obeying law, but from a sense of conscience.
Instinct.
Yeah.
That's that innate faculty that or that internal faculty, that innate discernment that we've spoken about. So this is a great passage, and you're right. The whole context certainly is valuable. So I guess we would encourage the listeners to go back and read a little bit more here. But great passage from the standpoint of kind of dumping us out right into the middle of this conversation. That really gets to the heart of kind of what we're talking about without, all the time in the world to fully dive into this during this podcast.
So my first question here, what is the distinction between acting out of conscience versus acting out of personal preference, emotion, or societal conditioning? I don't know if I have an answer for that, but that gets into the minutia of trying to define what conscience is. It's like, what separates the conscience from, how do you determine what is conscience versus what is preference, what is emotion? And I think this is a key part that I get into, especially when we start getting into believer and a believer, when they start having differences. What distinguishes conscience from preference, emotion, and societal conditioning? I think I kind of have an answer, but I want to hear what you have.
I appreciate that.
Well, to make sure if I need to speak up at all, because you probably have a better one.
You want to start just saying something, and then you think, oh, I probably shouldn't say that. It's my conscience saying, don't do it,
Here I am thinking you're gatekeeping all the answers.
Yeah. Well, I think oftentimes our conscience, especially in in matters that hinge on, if you will, spiritual relevance. Let's put it that way. I don't know how else to say it. That we might, as an individual, have a preference for one way or another, but our conscience, through that spiritual guarding or guiding, would say, let's say that in this scenario that it's something that we shouldn't do. Our preference might be that we want to do it, but our conscience says, no, don't do it. So I think that summarily might help us to understand, my conscience is going to cause me to check up. I can easily override it.
Yeah.
So then that goes back to, how much integrity do we have in abiding by our conscience, or are we just going to go with our own preference or the societal conditioning? Because that's, as we were having conversation outside of this, a lot of that has probably been dismissed by society, especially over the last number of years, where everything's like, hey, does it make you feel good?
And the goalposts change a lot as far as, two things that, at least from, and I'm probably missing something, but, murder and theft seem to be the most constant, even from Cain and Abel. You have murder there. But everything else, you could probably name some more, but even I can't think of anything that anything else that has been so consistent. A lot of other things have kind of fluctuated as far as culturally acceptable or not acceptable in some form or fashion. I'm going to just quit trying to beat around the bush and saving stuff for later, because it comes, I'm thinking really in the context of believer and believer dynamic. To me, to distinguish between acting out of conscience versus acting out of personal preference, emotion, or societal conditioning, that's a question. I don't really have an answer to that question verbatim, but it's a question that we all need to ask, because to me, it starts from that personal standpoint.
Absolutely.
All of these differences, divisions, disunity, whatever, all come from a place of, or I won't say all. I think a lot from what I've witnessed, I think a lot of them come from a place of not stopping and checking with yourself first, checking your own internal conscience of, is this a personal preference? Is this a conviction? Conviction to me is just a verb form of conscience. That's a term that's been near and dear to me here lately, is trying to analyze where am I convicted, to get to those things that I can't fully explain why I feel the way they do. I try to, is this a personal preference? Is this something I grew up doing and it's just become very comfortable and natural to me? And I try to analyze it that way and try to sort those out. If it is, okay, then why is that comfortable to me? Why I try this other thing, whatever it is, why is that not comfortable? And just try to analyze it, but come from a personal standpoint of really trying to dig down, because I've really feel like I've dug down to certain things that go beyond personal preference to a place of conviction of, I can't explain it, but I really feel compelled that this is what we should do or not do or whatever it is. But you have to identify. It starts from a personal standpoint of identifying what are those personal convictions and trying to weed them out. Is it a preference? Is it a cultural condition? Is it a conviction? And just, you have to start there as far as sorting that out, I think.
Maybe for the sake of argument and conversation during this podcast, maybe we look at an example, not that we have to label it with any particular thing, but something that we could all agree on, that would be like murder. We'll compare it to that, even though it's this, I would say, let's don't use murder, but something that we could all agree on that would be a wrong, an event, a wrong action in our lives.
Well, as you said that, I think even murder is starting to shift a little bit culturally.
Are you saying you like it or no?
No, I'm saying that it's
culturally, you're saying.
Yeah, culturally, because just one event comes to mind, the CEO of the health insurance.
Yes.
When he was murdered, and they have video evidence of him being murdered.
Right.
It wasn't so cut and dry that, murder is wrong. It was, okay, that guy deserved it, and not. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we've probably got a lot of examples of that, right?
So even that one has seemed to shift a little bit. It's culturally.
True. Okay. So, and so maybe you could lean into that. I think in general, though, everybody would agree.
I would think so. I would
fundamentally,
hope so.
that murder is absolutely wrong. Now, when you get into specific cases like what you just bring up there, that's where, so now as your individual preference, because of information that you believe that you know about this individual, might you say, he deserved it. But, and so maybe that's a great example. How do we maintain the integrity of our conscience and not allow it to be overridden by, you know what, I've never really liked that guy anyway.
Yeah. Another one comes to mind too, because I think it's, as far as our culture goes, and not just where we live or the circles that we're part of, Did you ever see the old John Grisham? I never read the book, but the movie with Matthew McConaughey, where he was a Mississippi lawyer, A Time to Kill, where, yeah.
But the one where he wore the white suit?
Yeah,
I don't
think
remember.
so, yeah. The story is like Mississippi. I don't think it was like set back in the 50s or 60s. I think it was like maybe more the 70s, 80s, or 90s. Right. But there was a little black girl that was run down by two white guys and brutally, murdered. Well, I don't think she was murdered, but she's brutally beaten. And then her dad, Samuel L. Jackson, comes out, hunts those two guys down.
Of course he did.
And so the trial is, well, was he right to do so? But so I bring that up as far as in that context. You think of a father going down to reap justice on your daughter. Man, that's something that's not as cut and dry anymore. As a father with a daughter, man, I can kind of what you're talking about. Man, those guys deserved it, kind of thing. Like that starts to even create some gray, hazy areas in the conscience, right? The discernment.
But surely, even in situations like that, our conscience is buzzing in the background, right?
Mm.
But we want justice for, especially in a situation like that where it's your own child.
With something like that, where you're really like, you don't mess with my daughter.
Yeah.
That's just,
so you're just blowing through every other.
When you said that, it's like, I don't know that my conscience is burning. And I know this is a fictional story. I'm sure there's some real stories that are very similar to it, but just thinking about that, it's like my feeling and emotion for my daughter, it covers up any kind of buzzing from my conscience as far as murder goes. Yeah. It's like, that's a strong feeling to overcome. But that also brings to mind another answer to that question as far as, the distinction between conscience and preference, emotion, and societal conditioning. I think if you think of that as far as you're confronting a fellow, especially a fellow believer, but anyone, is what's at the heart of that? What's at the heart of that conscience? If that conscience is created in the divine image, God, what is God? God is love. Love is at the base of this. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your God with all your heart and all your soul. Love those who despitefully use and abuse you. That's the one that gets left out quite a bit. So I think in the context of, even with my daughter, and it's even hard to say out loud, like to love anyone that would threaten her, right. It's hard to say that and hard to think in those terms. And you think of like people who have lost loved ones who forgive the killer. And that is an ultimate example of love.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that's, to get to the heart of it, love has a big connection here to conscience, that innate conscience that's driving, and understanding what love is, which is a whole nother episode. But, I think that's going to be a big part of this, of conscience.
It's easy, especially with this topic, I think, because I think it can be abstract, Ben, that it's easy to go down a lot of different rabbit trails. And I think those rabbit trails all ultimately bring us back to the heart of this matter, is that we are God's children. We were created by him in his likeness. And so I think the Spirit is involved in this. And, there's lots of scripture that we can take a look at. Paul's great in his discussion about conscience and how it's impacted him. So maybe we'll get into that here shortly.
Yeah. And I think the key to that, with the Spirit, with the Holy Spirit guiding you, and yes, it's acting, but I think it's incumbent on the individual to be aware, show some awareness, to show some kind of personal reflection, and focus on the Holy Spirit at work. I think maybe there's examples of the Holy Spirit. I can think of some examples of the Holy Spirit working in spite of me sometimes. But as far as understanding conscience, or in the sense of growing in discernment, growing in wisdom and understanding, I think it all comes back to a place of personal reflection. And And that's where it starts, especially going back again, believer, whether it's believer, non-believer dynamic. It's just, you need to come from that place of, and I'm talking to myself and my own understanding is like, I've acted in so many times I've acted in ways that weren't in love. They were in personal vendetta, personal anger, personal bitterness, personal resentment, whatever. And I had to check myself. And when I'm acting in those ways, they're not effective. They're not they're covering up the conscience. When you're at least aware enough to come from a place of love and long suffering and endurance and, peace, I think that changes a lot of whatever you're trying to accomplish, which is hopefully unity in whatever dynamic.
Yeah, and almost every one of those examples that you alluded to there, if you're overriding your conscience in almost every instance, it's for pleasure of some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's vendetta, well, I mean, that's a pleasure. You're getting satisfaction by, quote, justice in some fashion, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think it is important that we have this self-reflection. Is like, why is it that I'm so bent on blowing right through that guardrail that's just saying, hey, slow down.
Slow down, Big Wayne.
Yeah, slow down, Big
Whoa,
Wayne.
Big Wayne. Pull back.
Yeah, and that's important. And then, and if you and I in conversation, if I share with you how I've blown through that guardrail, what are you doing, and what's your responsibility in helping me to step back to that guardrail?
Yeah.
How am I helping you?
When you really think of it in the actual sense, that's where I really struggle.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting into a little bit of accountability, and that's where I'm really bad. And you and I've had this conversation as far as like, I don't want to be that guy that comes in and says, you don't need to be doing that. First off, I'm not that guy. Like, I've got too much plank in my own eye to be that guy.
Yes.
But it's like,
it makes it challenging, right? Because we don't want to come across as judging, but I think again, as we were talking earlier, that the sense of humility, right? And I think if we're doing that, in the way that we approach each other with humility, with love, you've already mentioned,
baby, don't hurt me no more.
Yeah. So I mean, there's no intent to hurt, but all the intent to show love, to show the intent of keeping us each safe, right? In the Lord's arms.
Now we're going to start, hopefully we're going to start moving on from trying to define conscience to be, getting more in depth into the dynamic of it, and how do we grapple with it, especially when we're facing others who are coming from a place of conscience and conviction that we may differ from. But before we do that, real quick, you mentioned Paul has a lot to say about this, and I'm going to try to get through some of this a little quickly. Some categories of conscience that I found. The good and clear conscience. Paul talks about, I strive always to maintain a clear conscience before God and men. And that's just an admirable sentiment right there.
No doubt, right?
I think it was Acts 24:16. I think Peter says something similar in his first letter. Then you have the weak conscience. New believers may possess an underinformed conscience, easily wounded by questionable practices.
Yeah.
Preach that one. Paul writes about that, 1 Corinthians 8:7-12. Mature believers must limit liberty for their sake. And that's what I think we were just talking about. Like, man, how do you do that in an effective way? Because you think about when you were younger, and when I was younger, I didn't really respond very well to accountability. And you don't want to be that person that drives somebody away if you fail in that very delicate situation.
And the other aspect of this, especially as we talk about believer to believer, it requires knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means you've got to have community, and not just community, but a strong sense of community. So if you
strong sense of love for that person too.
Yeah. And if you and I are just waving to each other in the parking lot as we're walking into the building and we never have community beyond that,
Meaningful conversation.
if we don't have meaningful conversations, we're not having interactions, if we're not sharing with each other, then the rest of this doesn't really matter.
That's another one. Sharing with each other, like sharing struggles and
Your
sin
struggle. Absolutely.
with one another. That's a tough one to give over to.
Yeah,
to
how
be
much are we growing
vulnerable.
if we've made it to that point where we're doing that?
To be
Right.
vulnerable with someone. Let me see here. So that last point on the week, the conscience
Mhm.
and the part where mature believers must limit liberty for their sake. I got here 1 Corinthians 10, 28, 29. Let me find that real quick. So, yeah, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 28. But if anyone says to you, and again, I'm coming in limited context, so
Mhm.
y'all please go back and read the context. But if anyone says to you, this, I don't know this part. This is meat sacrificed to idols.
That's right.
So I think if I remember correctly, this is him talking about, again, context, kind of similar to that passage in Romans where context between Gentiles and Jews, that dynamic of bridging those two kind of mindsets. But if anyone says to you, this is meat sacrificed to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. Now, by conscience, I do not mean your own, but the other person's. For why is my freedom judged by another's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I slandered about for which I give thanks? And I remember this passage. Now, this has always been one that's really convicting because it's taking it past. Here we are trying to understand our own individual conscience. You're trying to understand your whole personal discernment. I'm trying to understand mine. Well, now he's talking about being aware of others' conscience,
Right.
and protecting their conscience.
Right.
If you're feeling convicted about something that I may disagree with, there's a fine line here. Because later he does talk about accountability, holding one another accountable. But then there's going to be some things that we're not going to agree on 100%. But there's still got to be a way we can be unified.
Right. And
Almost agree to disagree kind of thing.
I think in this scenario, the way it was kind of initiated was that this person has developed a conscience around this particular topic that may not be as well informed that you as a more mature believer might be informed. And you've said, hey, I have freedom here.
Yeah.
In my normal daily life, I might take advantage of that freedom, but in a context where you're involved in some activity with them that might compromise that, you need to be sensitive to their beliefs.
So just to add, because it's so hard to talk about these things in the abstract and be effective, I think. Just kind of bring it maybe to a little bit of a tangible point. One thing that I do struggle with, and this is something I've been saving to talk about on another episode. We can get into the details of it in another episode, but from a personal standpoint, I found myself in a very minority on this. Images of Christ. That's something I take very personally, but very, man, I'm losing my words here.
It's of high importance to you.
I hold that very high reverence, just like the name of the Lord. I don't throw around the name of God, the name of Christ flippantly. I try to be very, deliberate when I invoke God's name.
Right.
I'm like that with images of Christ. And again, I know I'm in the very minority, and I'm not, again, I'll explain all of this in another episode, but just to kind of tie it to something. I understand not everybody's like that.
Right.
Like, I avoid movies about Jesus, TV shows about Jesus, any depictions about him. And mainly it's from a personal standpoint of when I read scripture, and Garden of Gethsemane has always been a very important one to me. When I read that story in scripture, I get this image in my mind from reading. And I want to protect that image because that image comes from reading the word. And so I do everything I can to protect that. And you're not going to keep out all influences. There's some influences in there that I may not even realize, but I try so hard to protect that image in my mind of, and I've read some works, some books of people who go that far where even imagining Jesus is wrong. But anyway, I don't know if I agree with that, but I try to protect that. So, but I'm not, this is where I've struggled because it's like, I try to avoid that. And I know not everybody is like that. I think a lot of people get a lot of good from watching shows or movies of the depiction of Christ's crucifixion and whatever. I think it may do a lot of good for some folks. So that's where I've tried to navigate my personal preference with, in that personal conviction. And this is where it's like, I think it's a preference, but it's also, there's some conviction there. I feel very convicted of honoring Christ's. And the more that I've studied it, and again, I'll get into more of the details at another time, but I think it's something that we should all kind of at least consider more and deeper. But anyway, but I'm not going to write people off. I'm not going to judge people for watching that stuff and whatever. But yeah, at the same time, just to give an example, I think our preacher Matthew was a great example of this. They were doing a special Bible study on The Chosen, and I've opened up to him about my feelings on this, and he even came to me. He's like, "I'm just going to let you know, we're doing a Bible study. We're going to be watching The Chosen." And, he was doing that as far as to protect my conscience. I think that was a great example of, hey, no hard feelings if you want to sit it out and all of that. And I appreciate the heads up because I didn't want to have to walk in there and walk out, and not in a way of that I'm protesting, but in a way that I'm trying to protect that.
Right. So you're trying to maintain a level of reverence without being imposed upon by somebody else's view that might be, maybe we use the term flippant.
Yeah, flippant. I'll be facetious with myself, but yeah, flippant maybe.
Yeah. So maybe not holding that image to as high a level as you might prefer.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and all that was just to kind of tie this to something tangible that we can maybe grapple with. But so along with, and again, I think Matthew was a great example of that because, and I just felt the fact that he remembered we had that conversation. He remembered I felt that way, and he gave me a heads up, and there was no hard feelings. I wasn't shunned or looked down on. It was just, he was respecting my conscience on that, and that means the world to me.
And that scenario actually gave us components of everything that we just discussed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you obviously had shared that with him. He acknowledged it and then helped to protect your conscience on that.
And that's coming from, Paul, when he's writing that, it seems like he's talking to somebody about you be Matthew in that situation. And I'm coming from it from someone who was Matthew in that situation.
Yes.
And I've reaped the benefit of that. And I think that's maybe another piece of context to add to it. But another category of conscience, defiled. Persistent sin dulls moral perception. To the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their minds and consciences are defiled. That's Titus. Paul writes to Titus in Titus 1:15. And then seared conscience, false teachers speak lies and hypocrisy, seared in their own conscience. He writes a lot to Timothy about that, and that one's 1 Timothy 4:2. And then evil conscience, an uncleansed heart remains haunted by guilt. Hebrews 10:22. Finally, blameless conscience. Paul served God with a clear conscience, even under accusations.
Yeah, and I think, as you're reading there, a couple of things that are almost progressive is that persistent sin, where you're persistently overriding your conscience and involving yourself in something that is wrong, but it's something that you want to do.
Yeah.
So it's persistent, and which ultimately I think results or can result in a seared conscience, where that no longer you no longer will give any heed to that guardrail.
Paul writes about that in some place. It's very convicting. I think it's Romans. Romans 8, maybe Romans 8 or 9, where he's like, I do the thing I want to do. When you read it, it's very confusing and very wordy, but I don't do the things I don't want to do. But I heard one speaker say it this way, and it's stuck with me ever since. When he was talking to a group, he's like, some of you say you love Jesus, say you love God, but you continue to sin. And what you're talking about too, especially, is that sin, that not knowing, when you're doing something wrong and you know it's wrong, that intentional type of sin, that's a big one.
That's what really prompted this thought for me.
And what this speaker said, and that stuck with me, was some of you who continue to act in that sin, you love that sin more than you love God.
There you go.
And that's something you've got to acknowledge. When you put that sin above God, you say you love God, but you continue to sin, then it was like, what was it, John, I think, that wrote, or James, I think it was John, when you say you love God but hate your neighbor, you're a liar. So similarly, you're a liar. If you love God but you continue to act in this sin, you have to be honest with yourself and recognize you love that sin more than you love God. You're putting that sin above God.
Yeah, so how do you get yourself back from that? I mean, that's honest reflection.
Yeah.
You have to acknowledge it. I think you actually have to say it to yourself. And then how do you step back over that line?
Prayer. For me, it's that first, it's acknowledging and saying it in a blunt way like that, finding that way. When that speaker said that, I've stuck with it. And I told myself, you love that sin more than you love God. And that's enough for me to hit home. And then secondly, like you said, you still got to pull out of that commitment or whatever you're about, whatever. Yeah. If you catch yourself before you sin, prayer, God, give me the strength to overcome whatever this is. And sometimes you can maybe catch it if you're about to make an intentional decision. Sometimes I have to catch myself going into a situation that I know is going to cause anger and bitterness, and my tongue may get out of control, or control my tongue. You speak through me. Don't let me speak.
Right. And I think a lot of times that's the difficult thing. Having accountability with somebody. And I'll be honest, I struggle with that. There's things that I probably need to have like an accountability partner in order for myself to truly take the necessary steps to overcome and to strengthen my resolve. I think that I need to do a better job. So as we're moving with the idea of believer to believer and knowingly overstepping bounds of our conscience, I think it is of ultimate importance that we strengthen that community, that sense of community, and create that vulnerability by sharing and that openness to have that resolve.
The accountability thing you're talking about, I think it's twofold. You've got one, you being held accountable, and two, you holding someone else accountable, right? So I feel like I'd like to think I've gotten better on the being held accountable part, because at least I've gotten to a place where I recognize accountability. When you're young and you're being disciplined and held accountable for your actions, you're not thinking in those terms. You're just thinking of crime and punishment kind of thing. Right. I feel like I've at least reached a place where I'm being more in the moment, aware of, okay, this is being held accountable. But also this plays to the second part of, it's how you're being held accountable. Is it from a straight emotional reaction? That never really sits well with me. If I feel like somebody is reacting emotionally towards what I'm doing, that's going to shut me down. And two, that should open my eyes and how I hold others accountable. It shouldn't be from a place of instant reaction and emotion. It should be from a thoughtful, loving, humility, humble place of love, in the sense of, I'm a flawed person, and I recognize I'm a flawed person. Here, as a flawed person, trust me, I can help you with this. Come from a place of help, not just a place of chastisement. And because you and I think are in the same boat, we're so afraid to be that guy, that those people that have turned us off in the past in some way or another, where they were holding us accountable, but just maybe not in an effective way. And that's my fear, is I don't want to be an ineffective person if I'm going to hold someone accountable. I don't want to be that guy.
You don't want to come at somebody with the paddle.
Yeah.
Rather than come at them with questions.
I had some pledges in college, I've been there.
Yeah. So I think, coming from a place of understanding, trying to understand, because we don't all understand what it is that motivates us, right? We all have, let's just throw this out on the table. We all have our dark secrets, right? And there's different things that motivate us to hold on to those. I gave a lesson years ago about a stumbling block, right? Well, why is it that we keep bending down and picking up that stumbling block and putting it back in our pocket that we can throw right out in front of us again, that we just keep on tripping over it? At some point, we've got to give that rock up.
That's such a fascinating thought too, because I was just thinking about this the other day. I mean, you think and that's a great deep point, even on a very surface level. How many times have I stepped over something in this house before I realized I could just pick that up? How many times have I got to stack stuff on the garbage can before I realized I could just take the garbage out? Exactly. It's like, even on a very surface level, those maybe not all of us, but I think a lot of us are probably like that, where we just, why do we never stop to think, hey, I can just solve the problem instead of trying to work around it constantly?
That's right. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, you love the idea about Paul stating that he tries to maintain clear conscience. Man, what a tremendous thing, right? And not just that, but a clear conscience with all people.
Yeah. Well, and we think that's such a fascinating thing too. Clear conscience. What do you think of when you think clear conscience? Because, like, to me, it almost implies like someone without blame,
right?
Sinless, almost.
And we know he wasn't without blame,
right? So it's not that. So what it is being able to not coexist, but I don't know, lack of a better way, coexist with that. Hey, I'm not perfect.
He's coexisting with what his former life, right? Yep. And now he has a confidence,
forgetting who I was in the past.
Because who else forgot what was in the past?
My wife.
And God.
She doesn't forget, by the way.
God transformed him.
Yeah.
Well, that's a flaw of all of us humans, right? We don't forget.
But transforming, that's a key word there. Right. Regeneration, of becoming a new person, of becoming a new. That's really the hardest thing, is that forgetting. I've talked about that. I've been doing a series that we're getting ready to release soon, Profiles of Faith, where I've interviewed some of the older folks, and one gentleman in particular I had a conversation with who, that was his big thing, that it's like, even at an older age, trying to just forget those things he's done. He believes in God's grace. He acknowledges he's so thankful for that grace, but trying to, even at an old age, extend that grace to yourself. If you really believe that grace from God, how do you participate in it?
Yeah. How confident are we in that belief, right?
Yeah.
And so I love the idea that you just mentioned there of becoming anew, that regeneration, right? It's not a one-time event.
Preach.
It should happen
every morning,
over again,
every
man.
day.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get quite as far into this. There's so much. I know this. You'd think I'd learn by now. Yeah, topics like this that it's hard to hit in an hour or so. But we're definitely going to have to revisit this in another episode, continue this conversation. But at least we kind of got a little bit of a definition of conscience. And in a very roundabout way. And I think we hit a lot of other good points about that conscience, that conviction, and the dynamic between one another, whether believer and believer, believer, non-believer. And with all that being said, as we kind of wrap this episode up, I'll end it with, what Paul says to Timothy. His words to Timothy are so good. He's got a lot of gold in these letters, but when he starts off First Timothy in verse 5, he says, "But the goal of our instruction, his goal to Timothy in instructing him, is love."
Yeah,
this is what we talked about earlier. Love from a pure heart, from a good conscience. That's one I missed. Good conscience. And from a sincere faith. Some people have strayed from these things and have turned aside to fruitless discussion, wanting to be teachers of the law, even though they do not understand either what they are saying or the matters about which they make confident assertions. Oh,
man,
it's so easy to see, take that and be like, I know those people who are making confident assertions. It's a lot harder to, I'm the one making the confident assertions.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we're talking about. You dissecting, starting from a place of analyzing yourself and dissecting, am I making confident assertions, or am I coming from a place of love with a pure heart and good conscience? And then that speaks directly to what we were just talking about as far as accountability, holding others accountability. He just gives us right there how you hold someone accountable. It's a place of a goal of instruction from a place of love, from a pure heart, from a good conscience, and from a sincere faith.
We should probably start every conversation when we go to to try to help somebody. Let's work on this together, because more than likely it's our problem too.
Absolutely, yes, man. That's a great thing to remember. And I think at least what gets in my way is that, like we talked about, emotional reaction. And I think you hit on it too, a place of, you want that gratification of putting that person in their place, being the one standing over them, and so they can see you in all your greatness and rightness. But that never plays.
It might feel good in the moment, right? But gets nobody anywhere near to a good place
right
afterwards.
Well, I think we pretty much hammered out what a conscience is.
Hey, what a great hour.
We haven't even scratched the surface yet. So, Wayne, we're gonna have to keep this one going. But as far as this one goes, I think it's a good introduction, and I hope it, like you were saying, I hope this at least it provides good, wholesome conversation and good, wholesome thoughts. As far as, and that's always been the goal of small group, is just to provide you guys something to listen to that is good and pure and genuine, from a genuine place, to at least just think some things to think on. And I hope that's what we offered you this evening. And we'll be back here real soon with hopefully some more wholesome wisdom to think on, wholesome words to think on, I guess is what I should say. But anyway, we thank you guys for joining us all across the country, all across the world. All of you folks down in Guatemala, we thank you. Taylor Sabrina, talking to you. Thank you guys for joining in. Till next time, we'll see you.
The Small Group Podcast is a production of GB&L. Find all of our current and upcoming projects, as well as shop the GB&L store at goatbear.com. smallgroup.wordpress.com.